So, more exorcisms, huh? Looks like you folks didn't quite get enough of the nitty-gritty gruesome details of some pretty possessive demons getting sent back to hell. Well, strap in and grab your favorite demon ejecting item, because we got a few more stories of some exorcisms that didn't go according to plan. What is good, my friends? I'm your host, Nicholas Playlog, and today we're going to be looking at the top 5 scary events that took place during an exorcism, part 2. Let's get into it. Number 5 on this list is the exorcism of Emma Schmidt. Emma Schmidt's exorcism was a widely publicized affair that happened in 1928. What's interesting about this case is that Emma Schmidt had actually been the subject of an exorcism from the same exorcist in 1912. Father Riesinger was the one who performed the exorcism in 1912, and when he heard about how she'd become possessed again, he rushed to help her. However, this time he didn't expect the demon to have as strong as a hold on her soul as it did. Now, it's written that after Father Riesinger began to perform the exorcism, Emma dislodged herself from her bed and from the hands of her guards, and her body, carried through the air, landed high above the door of the room and clung to the wall with a tenacious grip. All present were struck with a trembling fear. The nuns who were present and assisting reportedly grabbed her and strapped her back down to the bed, even though she was screaming and squirming in unnatural ways. It's said that this exorcism required 23 days to complete, and during that time, Emma would regularly be vomiting up bile and fighting as much as she could to stop it from happening. It's even said that Lucifer appeared during this exorcism and made his presence known by attacking the exorcist at one point. Emma also had super strength and was able to bend the iron bars on her bed, even though she was extremely malnourished at that point. Father Riesinger was mentally drained and exhausted after the 23 days of performing that exorcism and claims that he had never seen anything like that in his time on Earth. Number 4 on this list is the movie The Exorcist. Now, The Exorcist is one of the most famous horror films of all time and is sometimes credited as being the scariest movie of the genre. Now, the movie The Exorcist is actually based off of a real-life exorcism that took place in the 1940s. This was an exorcism of a 14-year-old boy documented under the pseudonym Roland Doe. Supernatural events took place during this exorcism, which then inspired the creation of the film several decades later. Rather than look at the actual exorcisms here, though, I actually want to look at the creation of the movie The Exorcist, because there's actually a curse that surrounds it. Jack McGowan, the man who plays the film director in the movie, died before the film actually hit the big screens. He died due to influenza that he got in 1973. Vasiliki Malaros, who also acted in the movie, died before the movie was seen by anyone. Many people who were involved in filming of the movie lost their family members whilst the movie was in production. There was also a report of another one of the actors almost dying in a near-fatal motorcycle crash. This was all coupled with the fact that in the early production of the movie, the entire set caught fire because a bird flew into the circuit box. There were several other crazy mishaps that went on during the filming of this movie, along with the actual premiere, which was then hit with a lot of controversy. All of this has led people to believe that there is actually a curse tied to the movie and the entire production of it. Some believe that the demon from the initial exorcism in the 1940s came back to incite some chaos on the team recreating the story. Whatever the case was, it's certainly pretty crazy that one of the scariest movies of all time had one of the most controversial and scary filming processes of all time as well. Number 3 on this list is the exorcism of Terrance Cottrell. Terrance Cottrell's exorcism is a sad story of a little boy who lived in Milwaukee in 2003. Terrance, in his mother's eyes, had been possessed by a demon, and she believed that it needed to be exorcised from him. This wasn't the case, though. In fact, it seemed that Terrance had actually been diagnosed with autism. However, the mother refused to believe this was the case and instead convinced herself that he was possessed. In 2003, she drove her boy to a strip mall in Milwaukee where there was the Faith Temple Church of the Apostolic Faith. A bunch of evangelical Christians gathered here, and they had agreed to perform an exorcism on Terrance and get rid of this so-called demon once and for all. Sadly, this isn't what happened at all, and as I imagine many of you can expect, Terrance was killed during the ritual. Once he arrived at the church, a sheet was thrown over top of him and it bound his arms and legs. The pastor, Reverend Ray Hemphill, who was performing the exorcism, lay the boy down with the sheet over top of him and then lay on top of him himself, whispering his ritual into the child's ear. This went on for over 2 hours until the Reverend and the group realized that Terrance had died. The official cause of death was listed as mechanical asphyxia due to external chest compression. The pastor had lied on Terrance for too long, and his weight basically crushed his chest. This, along with the fact that he'd been wrapped in a sheet, which would have made it difficult to breathe anyways, caused the boy to suffocate. This case was obviously brought to the court of law, and it was revealed that our so-called exorcist was never properly trained on the subject at all. He He went to jail for 2.5 years and was barred from performing exorcisms unless he received extensive training on how to do them in the future. Number 2 on this list is an exorcism performed by Father Gabriele Amorth. Father Gabriele Amorth lived for almost a century and performed over 60,000 exorcisms in his long life. He's seen his fair share of demons and possessions, but one story in 1997 sticks out to him as being particularly bad. He co-wrote a book called The Devil is Afraid of Me, where he details his extensive history with exorcisms, so if this is interesting to you, then I recommend checking that out. In that book, they describe this particular exorcism in detail, stating that his curses and threats were aimed solely at the exorcist. Then he began spitting at him and preparing to attack him physically. The book goes on to say that screaming and howling, the demon burst forth and looked straight at him, drooling saliva from the young man's mouth. This was all being conducted on a young man who had apparently been the victim of a demonic possession for months, and it was happening in Amorth's small exorcism room in Rome. Amorth says that after the demon revealed itself, he screamed back, "Whoever you are and all your companions who possess the servant of God, as I command you, tell me your name, the day and the hour of your damnation." To which the demon replied, "I am Lucifer." The room then became icy cold and crystals started to appear on the windows. The young boy began to float in his chair, and actual real-life nails that Amorth still has to this day started to form in this person's mouth. Amorth was bellowing the word of God at this point, and the demonic boy was shrieking at the top of his lungs. Finally, the boy fell to the ground and looked completely spent. This was only the first exorcism performed on this boy, and to fully exorcise the demon, it took Amorth several more months of sessions like this. But up until the day he died, he swore he never saw a demon that had that strong of a hold on somebody's soul. Number 1 on this list is the exorcism of Ryan Eastaugh. Ryan lived back in the 1200s in Ireland. He worked as a fisherman and supported his newlywed wife. Ryan worked with another older fisherman named Hugh, and Hugh had basically taught Ryan everything that he knew. In fact, when Ryan was younger, he was an orphan, and being completely homeless would have to steal to survive. One day, Hugh caught Ryan stealing from him, and rather than get the law involved, decided that he would take Ryan under his wing. That was over a decade ago, and even though Hugh wasn't blood related to Ryan in any way, he may as well have been based on the relationship that the two had developed. One evening, the pair were out on the water longer than they had intended, and a storm whipped up. The men were trying to sail back to shore, but the winds were harsh and unforgiving. With one swift gust, the boat was rocked hard and Hugh was thrown into the waves. Ryan ran to the side of the boat and saw as Hugh struggled to stay above water, but rather than help him by throwing him something or diving in himself, Ryan froze and just stood there. He stood there, planted, indecisive about what to do, and slowly, Hugh drowned right before Ryan's eyes. Ryan managed to weather the storm, and once it subsided, got the boat back to shore, but he was never the same after that. His mood grew dark, his outlook on life was gloomy, and his temper would often rage. His wife, who was now pregnant with his child, feared the worst, believing that Ryan may have become possessed with a demon. Without Ryan's knowledge, she got in contact with an exorcist and had him wait at their home for when her husband would get back. He came home late the night that the exorcist was there, and it was clear that he'd been drinking. He found his wife sitting there with the man, and upon hearing her explanation of the scenario, grew furious. The exorcist saw this deep anger and took it to mean that the demon was coming out and possessing Ryan. As Ryan's anger grew, the exorcist pulled out his cross and started chanting some deep incantation to keep the demon at bay. He barely got through the first few lines though, when Ryan grabbed a nearby bottle and struck the exorcist across the head. The man hit the ground and blood pooled from that large indent that was now sliced across his forehead. He was dead, and Ryan had murdered him. Immediately the fury was replaced with regret, and Ryan dropped to his knees. Sadly, it was too late though. The deed was done and he was sentenced to death shortly afterwards. Whether Ryan was actually possessed by a demon or not, that's unknown. I personally think the only demons that he was ever possessed with are the demons that he imposed onto himself for never acting when his father figure, Hugh, drowned in front of his eyes. Well, there you have it, guys. That is our list of the top 5 scary events that took place during an exorcism, part 2. Comment down below what you thought about this list. Also, I do want to shout out a few comments here from the last video we did on exorcisms, like Serena Levy, who said, "Talk about karma. Did Fyodor think he would get away with murder? Yet still, did his wife know what her husband had done?" And honestly, for real, like that story was pretty much immediate karma when it happened. So my guy really just should have realized to share the farmland. Also, Zin Evan Malang says, "Every time I heard the story about exorcism, especially who ended up with dead, my heart felt extremely sad. Like, I'm not scared, but I feel so much pain in my heart." And I totally hear that, dude. Honestly, researching these videos can be a lot sometimes. Like, some of these stories are just like really hard to read, so I definitely understand that. But anyways, guys, that's the video. Please hit the like and subscribe button. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you next time.